At 2 a.m. on a warm January night in 1966, the silence in Ibadan is broken by the sound of boots and gunmetal. A convoy crawls through the darkness, headlights dimmed, engines low. Young soldiers, some barely older than boys, clutch rifles that smell of oil and death. They are rehearsing the end of a man who, for decades, rehearsed speeches instead. Inside the Premier's lodge, a 55-year-old man is awake. Papers are still scattered on his desk. Speeches half-edited. Letters of complaint from enemies. Letters of flattery from friends. Somewhere under those papers, a calendar silently insists, there are only hours left. This is how the life of Samuel Ladoke Akintola ends. But to understand how a schoolteacher's son in a dusty Yoruba town becomes the man soldiers hunt in the middle of the night, we have to go back, far back, before the sirens, before the rifles, before the shouts, back to a boy born under empire who decides he will argue with it using nothing but his voice, back to 1910. The sun over Ogbomoso is harsh, white, unforgiving. It bleaches the red earth, burns the roofs of mud houses, and shimmers over the narrow paths, where children run barefoot, laughing at dust and hunger. In one modest house on July 6, 1910, a child is born and given a name that will one day echo through Parliament halls. Samuel Ladoke Akintola. His world is divided long before he understands the word politics. On one side, there is tradition. Yoruba elders under trees, speaking in proverbs older than the British Empire itself. On the other, there are men in stiff uniforms and white collars, speaking in English and Bible verses. Missionaries preach salvation, colonial officers preach order, elders preach pride, and between them a skinny boy listens. He hears the snap of the schoolmaster's cane on bare skin. He hears the heavy English of a colonial administrator who mispronounces Yoruba names with casual power. He hears church hymns merging with talking drums in the distance, a strange and uneasy harmony. In that noise, Samuel begins to discover something dangerous. He likes words. He listens to how a phrase can make adults nod, how a proverb can end an argument, how a Bible verse can quiet a crowd. He watches how voice can reshape reality, how a man who speaks well is treated differently from a man who only shouts, and he decides, quietly, stubbornly, he will learn to speak like that. Not with a cane, with sentences like whips. Education is not a gentle path. It is a battlefield with slates and chalk instead of rifles. The colonial school is strict. English is not just a language, it is a border. On one side, progress. On the other side, backwardness. At least, that is how the rulers want it to sound. Samuel feels that border in his bones. Yoruba is the language of his home, his jokes, his prayers, his fear. English is the language of authority, of the classroom, of the men who decide who gets promoted, who gets ignored. Each time he stumbles on a word, he feels the smirk of power. So he pushes back the only way he can. He studies like war. He memorizes grammar rules like someone stockpiling weapons. He drills vocabulary, word after word, late into the night, his eyes burning in the dim light. While other boys sleep, he rehearses sentences, mimicking the accents of teachers, missionaries, colonial officers. The first shock comes when he realizes something quietly explosive. English can be bent. He can pour Yoruba cadences into English sentences, twist phrasing, choose words that sound like drums. He can make this foreign language sound like home, and in doing so, he can begin to own it. The boy from Ogbomoso is not just learning to read. He is learning how to occupy the language of the empire and turn it back toward his own people. Teaching is his first profession, and in a way, his first stage. Samuel becomes a teacher, not because it is glamorous, but because it is one of the few paths open to an ambitious African under colonial rule. The pay is small, the classrooms are crowded, the cane is always within reach. But he sees something in those tiny, cramped rooms that the British officials cannot see. An army in uniform. Not in khaki, in school uniforms. Every child who learns to read is a potential critic. Every child who learns to count can one day question taxes. Every child who learns history can ask why their land is ruled from thousands of miles away. Standing at the front of the classroom, chalk in hand, Samuel realizes that knowledge is not neutral. He is supposed to teach loyalty, discipline, respect for authority. Instead, he begins quietly to teach something else. Confidence, curiosity. The idea that the future does not have to look like the present. He tells his pupils stories of Yoruba heroes, of kings who ruled before the Union Jack, of warriors and traders and diplomats who negotiated without London's permission. He tells them that they too can stand up and speak. In front of these children, he learns something about himself. He likes the sound of his own voice when it changes people. The classroom is too small. He wants a bigger audience. The bigger audience comes through words on paper. The Nigeria of the 1930s and 1940s is a country in slow motion. Railways stretch out like veins. Cities swell, newspapers multiply. People who never see a European in person still feel the weight of British decisions. Newspapers become the battlefield of ideas. Samuel steps onto that battlefield as a journalist and editor, where ink is the weapon and headlines are artillery. He joins the world of print not as an idle observer, but as a fighter with a pen. Articles become speeches that travel. Columns become sermons without pulpits. Editorials become carefully crafted grenades rolled under the feet of colonial comfort. He learns how to turn outrage into paragraphs. He learns that a well-placed metaphor can hurt more than an insult, that a statistic, cold and specific, can mock a governor more effectively than 100 angry adjectives. He also learns something darker. Words bring attention, and attention brings risk. Each time his newspaper criticizes policies, corrupt chiefs, or colonial hypocrisy, he feels the invisible eyes of power turn toward him. Official complaints, quiet warnings. Friendly advice to tone it down. He does not tone it down. Instead, he sharpens. In the newsroom, amid the clatter of typewriters and the smell of ink, a new persona is forming. Not just Samuel the teacher, but Akintola the orator, Akintola the critic, Akintola the man who will one day stand in a parliament and slice through opponents with a smile. But criticism from Africa, in English, is like shouting inside the master's house. It is heard, but it is not decisive. To truly challenge the system, Samuel decides he needs something that still seems unthinkable for many Africans of his generation: a legal education. Law is the language of real power. Colonial officials issue proclamations. Judges interpret. Lawyers argue. And ordinary people suffer or survive according to rules written far away. If he can master those rules, he can do more than complain. He can contest. So, as the world trembles in the wake of the Second World War, Samuel makes a decision that will twist his fate. He leaves. He travels to Britain, the very heart of the empire that rules his homeland. The journey itself is a violent contrast. He leaves red earth and talking drums and arrives in a gray world of cold stone and cold faces, of damp air and reserved voices. In London, black skin is both exotic and invisible. He is treated as colonial subject and student, curiosity and inconvenience. But he's also treated as something else: competition. In the law classrooms, he sits beside British students who have never seen Africa, but will one day manage companies that extract its wealth. He listens to lectures that describe his homeland as territory, protectorate, market. To them, it is an abstraction. To him, it is home. Every case study, every statute, every principle of common law becomes personal. When professors speak of equity and rights, he hears African farmers. When they speak of sovereignty, he hears traditional rulers sidelined and mocked. He studies harder than ever, not just to pass exams, to outplay the people who think his country is a chessboard. The law degree he is chasing is more than a certificate. It is a weapon he plans to take back across the sea. Time, however, is no longer a vague background. There is a clock ticking now. Nationalist movements are growing. Protests are spreading. Negotiations over the future of Nigeria are whispered in corridors, debated in newspapers, argued in drawing rooms. The political race has started, whether he is ready or not. Every month he spends in England is a month lost in that race. If he returns too late, the front seats at the table of power will be taken by others with similar dreams, similar talents, and their own hunger for history. Somewhere in Nigeria, another young Yoruba man, Obafemi Awolowo, is also studying, organizing, planning. Their paths have not fully converged yet, but they will. And when they do, they will not both fit comfortably in the same spotlight. When Samuel finally returns to Nigeria, now a trained lawyer and seasoned journalist, the air feels different. There is electricity in the conversations. Men in suits gather in smoky rooms to debate constitutions, federal arrangements, the possibility of self-government. Women in markets talk of taxes, food prices, the strange new word independence that seems to promise everything and nothing. The colonial masters are still in charge, but their confidence is cracked. The war has weakened Britain. Anti-colonial movements across the world have begun to win. The empire is no longer invincible. It is negotiable. Samuel steps into this charged atmosphere like a man stepping onto a moving train. He opens a legal practice, yes. He returns to journalism, yes. But beneath the day-to-day work, something larger is pulling him. Politics. Not the quiet politics of petitions and polite delegations, the loud politics of mass rallies, party banners, and fiery speeches that make poor people stand for hours in the sun because, for the first time, someone is telling them their voices matter. He has the tools, the teacher's patience, the journalist's sharpness, the lawyer's logic. Now he needs something else, a platform. The platform arrives in the form of a party that will reshape Western Nigerian politics. The Action Group, founded in the early 1950s, the Action Group is a bold experiment. Part political party, part social movement, part intellectual club. Its leaders talk about modernizing the Western region, promoting education, resisting domination from the colonial authorities and from rival regions. And at the center of it stands a man whose name will be forever tied to Samuel's, Obafemi Awolowo. Awolowo is brilliant, disciplined, ideologically driven. He believes in careful planning, in structures, and strategy. He is less interested in applause than in outcomes, less seduced by rhetoric than by results. Samuel, on the other hand, is a storm. He is charismatic, flexible, witty, able to swing a crowd with a single joke and crush an opponent with a single phrase. If Awolowo is the architect, Akintola is the lead singer. Their partnership, at first glance, is perfect. The party needs both minds. The Western region needs both voices. Awolowo and Akintola stand side by side, presenting a united front. One as the intense organizer, the other as the electrifying orator. Crowds chant their names together. Newspapers celebrate their alliance. Supporters speak of them like two blades of the same sword. But beneath the public harmony, a quiet, delicate tension forms. They are both too big, too ambitious, too aware that Nigeria's future is not yet written, and that whoever writes the first chapters will be remembered longest. In every meeting, every strategy session, every debate about policy and principle, another clock ticks, not of years, but of patience. How long can two towering egos share one stage? How long before alliance turns to rivalry? For now, Samuel throws himself fully into the work. He tours towns and villages, moving through the western region with exhausting speed. Campaign trails are dusty. The sun is merciless. Roads are bad. But he moves with urgency, as if he already hears, faintly, the countdown of a life that will end too soon. He speaks in Yoruba and English, weaving them together in a way that feels natural, powerful, and new. He tells market women that their children deserve schools. He tells farmers that their cocoa should feed their families before it feeds foreign factories. He tells young men that politics is not the exclusive game of colonial officers and distant elites. At each stop, he watches faces change. There is a specific look he comes to recognize. The moment a listener stops seeing themselves as a subject and begins to see themselves as a citizen, that look becomes his addiction. He is not naive. He knows politics is also about deals in backrooms, compromises with chiefs, negotiations with colonial authorities who still control key levers. He learns how to flatter, how to threaten lightly, how to make enemies think they are friends. For now, and always at his side or just ahead of him, is the shadow of Obafemi Awolowo. Sometimes they campaign together. Awolowo laying out carefully crafted policies, Akintola turning those policies into stories that villagers can feel in their bones. Other times they campaign separately and reports filter back. Awolowo drew a huge crowd. Akintola's speech made them roar. Supporters begin to compare them, innocently at first. Who is the better speaker? Who is the better thinker? Who should lead when the British finally loosen their grip? Questions like these do not disappear. They grow, and somewhere, deep inside both men, a realization hardens. The path to the top may not have space for two. At this point, the young boy from Ogbomoso is long gone. In his place stands a man with tailored suits and polished shoes, a trained lawyer, a respected journalist, a star orator, and a rising politician. The world that once ignored him now leans in to listen, but every success he achieves tightens the tension. Success brings visibility. Visibility brings scrutiny. Scrutiny brings enemies. Colonial officials are wary of him. Traditional elites are divided about him. Some see him as an ally, others as a threat. Rival ethnic and regional groups watch the action groups rise with anxiety. And within his own movement, his unique blend of charm and cunning wins him both devoted followers and wary colleagues. The stage is set. Nigeria is moving faster toward independence. Elections loom. Constitutional conferences are called. The British are no longer asking whether to leave, but when and on what terms. The window for shaping the post-colonial order is shrinking by the day. Time has never mattered more. For Samuel Ladoke Akintola, every year, every campaign, every negotiation is no longer just about policy. It is about carving his name into the foundation of a country that does not exist yet, but soon will. And somewhere, in the quiet hours between rallies and meetings, perhaps he senses what we now know from the opening scene, that the time given to him is cruelly limited. He does not know the exact date, January 15th, 1966. He does not know the hour, around 2 a.m. He does not know the young men who will shout his name with rifles raised. But he knows this. History moves quickly and forgets the hesitant. So he chooses not to hesitate. The teacher, the journalist, the lawyer steps fully into the arena of power, side by side with a brilliant rival ally in a country racing against the clock, where every speech, every deal, every decision brings him closer to the greatest triumphs of his career, and to the night when boots will finally echo toward his door. Power does not arrive the way the posters promise it. It does not come with trumpets and flags and perfect speeches delivered to an adoring crowd. It comes in half-lit rooms at midnight, in hoarse voices over cold tea, in arguments that last so long the smoke from cigarettes stains the ceiling. It comes as a question whispered in the dark. If we don't take this seat now, will it ever be ours again? For Samuel Ladoke Akintola, that question becomes a countdown. Independence is no longer a dream, it is a deadline. By the mid-1950s, the British are tired, the world is changing, and Nigeria's impatient politicians can smell the exit door of empire. But the question is not just when Britain will leave, it is who will be ready to sit in the chairs they vacate. That is what the constitutional conferences are really about. In London and Lagos, in Ibadan and elsewhere, delegations of African politicians sit across from British officials in rooms where the walls themselves seem to sweat history. The Union Jack still hangs, but its colors look less certain. Typewriters clatter like distant gunfire. Files are stacked so high they resemble small tombstones. In those rooms, Samuel's no longer the boy watching colonial masters from the back of a classroom. He's at the table now. He leans forward, listens carefully, and then attacks, politely, elegantly, with sentences that begin like silk and end like knives. When a British official speaks of the readiness of the native population, Samuel's reply is swift. How many more decades of preparation do they intend to prescribe for a people who already run schools, courts, farms, and cities? The British side shifts in their chairs. To them, he is a problem wrapped in a compliment. Articulate, calm, armed with data and history. He cannot be dismissed as an angry street agitator. He speaks the king's English better than some of the king's own servants. They know that men like him will not be satisfied with symbolic roles. They want real power. Back in Western Nigeria, power is no abstraction. It is a map, a budget, a list of names. The Action Group is campaigning furiously to control the new regional government. The Western region is wealthy in cocoa and talent, proud in culture, and dangerously competitive in politics. The stakes are simple. Whoever wins here will not just govern a province. They will control a base from which to negotiate Nigeria's entire future. Obafemi Awolowo is the strategist. Samuel Akintola is the sword. On campaign trails, Awolowo lays out detailed plans. Tax reforms, free primary education, massive investment in infrastructure. When he finishes, the crowd nods, impressed but still slightly distant. Then Akintola steps up. He paints pictures instead of charts. He describes a world where a farmer's son can read better than the colonial officer's clerk. He describes a road that actually reaches that village, where women currently walk 10 kilometers, with loads of firewood on their heads. He describes the humiliation of watching cocoa leave in sacks and return as expensive chocolate, and asks in a tone half mocking, half furious, "Are we suppliers of raw material, or are we human beings?" Near the crowd roars. Somewhere at the back, a British observer notes stiffly that this man is dangerously persuasive. The Action Group wins in the Western region. Awolowo becomes premier. The victory is not clean. Politics never is. There are accusations, local grudges, chiefs who feel sidelined, opponents who claim manipulation. But the result stands, and with it, a new experiment begins. African politicians governing an African region under the watchful, skeptical eyes of the empire that still technically rules. Awolowo moves into the role of architect-in-chief. Samuel becomes one of his key lieutenants, taking on senior responsibilities, learning the machinery of government from the inside. He watches how a budget line on paper becomes, slowly, painfully, a new school in a remote village. He learns how civil servants can bury or accelerate a policy with a single file note. He learns that a brilliant idea means nothing if it dies in a drawer. Governing is not as glamorous as opposition. Meetings drag into the night. Arguments over decimal points and spending plans last longer than entire campaign rallies. Samuel, who used to stride onto platforms and win hearts in minutes, now sits over documents until his eyes sting. But he understands something. This is the price of real power. Speeches move crowds, policies move history. Yet even as the Western region experiments with bold reforms and aggressive modernization, the clock is ticking somewhere else. At the federal level, Nigeria is not just the West. There is the North, vast, populous, conservative, ruled by traditional authorities who walk carefully between modernity and faith. There is the East, ambitious, energetic, with its own political giants and its own vision of the future. Each region has its parties, its newspapers, its favorite sons. The race is no longer just for regional dominance. It is for national relevance. If the Action Group remains a purely Western phenomenon, it will watch from the sidelines while others sit in the driver's seat of independent Nigeria. Awolowo understands this. Samuel understands it too, but he feels it in a different way. For a man whose entire life has been about enlarging the audience, the idea of staying in a provincial box feels suffocating. So when chances arise for federal positions, Samuel steps forward. He serves in the central government, a Nigerian minister still operating under the umbrella of the British, but already negotiating with future Nigerian power brokers. He sits in cabinet meetings beside men from the north and east, their accents clashing, their priorities colliding, their smiles polite and thin. Here he discovers another kind of rivalry. It is not personal at first. It is regional. Who will dominate the federal government? Will the conservative Northern People's Congress, with its huge voting bloc, dictate terms? Will the Eastern-based party secure control through alliances? Will the action group manage to break out of its Western cage? Every conversation has a shadow. Every handshake hides a calculation. Every delay in setting a date for independence feels like an insult and a tactic. Then comes the moment when the future suddenly looks like a wall calendar. A date is chosen. October 1st, 1960, Independence Day. The Empire has given them a clock they can now see. For Samuel, that date is not just a celebration to be planned. It is a finish line and a starting gun merged into one. When the flag changes, the balance of power frozen at that moment will harden. Parties that control key positions and regions then will have an enormous advantage in the new Nigeria. He knows this is not just about ideals. It is about arrangements, about who sits where when the music stops. The 1959 federal elections become a brutal sprint toward that date. The action group throws everything into the campaign. Samuel's schedule turns insane. He wakes before dawn, speaks at rallies under a murderous sun, travels on terrible roads, arrives in new towns long after dark, stands on truck beds illuminated by car headlights, and speaks until his voice breaks. Doctors warn him about exhaustion. He laughs, coughs, and schedules another rally. Some nights, he falls asleep still wearing his shoes. At one rally, a woman faints from heat in the crowd. They pass her overhead, limp like a package, toward where he stands. He watches her being carried away and feels a chilling realization. People are literally risking their lives to listen to him talk. If they give him power and he fails them, it will not be an abstract failure. It will be a betrayal with faces. The election results are a blow. The action group performs well in the West, but the North's massive numbers and strategic alliances carry the day. The Northern People's Congress, in partnership with Eastern allies, forms the federal government. Awolowo and the action group are pushed into opposition at the center. For the man who has planned and fought for years to shape independent Nigeria from the very top, it is a bitter pill. For Samuel, it is a twist of fate. He does not become a central figure in the government of the new Nigeria. Instead, he is thrust into a different role. The voice of opposition in parliament, the man who stands up and tears holes in government, arguments while knowing that, at the end of every speech, the votes will still go against his side. He is brilliant at it. The House becomes his theater. When he rises to speak, conversation's quiet. He skewers ministers' claims, draws laughter and applause, forces embarrassed explanations. Newspaper cartoons depict him as a swordsman in a crowded arena, alone but dangerous. Yet every victory in debate has a hollow echo. He can expose, he cannot decide. Standing in that chamber, surrounded by green benches and the mutter of clerks and members, he feels both the thrill of performance and the ache of limitation. This is not the kind of power he wants. It is at this point that the most fateful rearrangement of chairs occurs. Awolowo, still party leader and intellectual center of the action group, decides to move to the federal level as leader of the opposition. His eyes are fixed on the highest office in the land. He wants to challenge from the center, to be within striking distance of the prime ministership when the political winds shift. But someone has to stay behind and hold the western region. Someone has to sit in the seat he is vacating. Premier. The choice seems obvious, yet it is not simple. Within the party, there are other heavyweights, respected lawyers, seasoned administrators, ambitious younger men. But none has Samuel's combination of charisma, experience, and sheer visibility. For years, he has been the face and voice of the party in the streets and in the chamber. In private meetings that stretch late into the night, names are floated, arguments exchanged. Voices rise, tempers flare. Behind closed doors, men who have marched together now secretly count each other's loyalists. Some whisper that Samuel's too flexible, too willing to compromise, too fond of political maneuvering. Others argue that he is exactly what the region needs now. A man who can charm chiefs, calm crowds, and negotiate brutally in cramped rooms when necessary. Eventually, the decision is made. The teacher's son from Ogbomoso becomes premier of the western region. Not by overthrow, by succession. But succession can be more dangerous than revolution because the old king is still alive. The day he walks into the premier's office for the first time as its master, Samuel feels a flicker of vertigo. On the wall, where portraits of colonial governors once hung, there is now the symbol of a self-governing region, On his desk lie files that will determine budgets, appointments, the future of schools, roads, hospitals. Outside the building, people go about their daily lives, unaware that the man signing those documents is still adjusting to the weight of the pen. He sits. He places his hand on the wooden surface. For a second, the room is quiet enough for him to hear his own heartbeat. This is what he has chased all his life. A seat where speech and power finally intersect. Yet even in this moment, he knows he is not entirely free. The party still has a leader. Awolowo is not just any leader. He is a legend in the making, the architect of many of the reforms that have won the Action Group its followers. He commands loyalty that is almost religious among sections of the party. Samuel, now premier, must govern in a house whose foundation was designed by someone else. Two centers of gravity now exist in the same political universe. One sits in Ibadan, in the premier's office. The other sits in Lagos and in the hearts of devoted party faithful. Gravity, by its nature, eventually pulls objects into collision. From the outside, for a while, the arrangement seems to work. Policies continue, schools open, roads are built. The Western region remains the most socially advanced part of Nigeria, admired and resented in equal measure. Visitors from other parts of Africa come to see how an African-led government is expanding education and modernizing its cities. But inside the party, inside the meetings that are never reported in newspapers, a fundamental disagreement is brewing. It is not about whether the West should prosper. Both men agree on that. It is about how to hold power in a federation where numbers favor the North, and where the East plays a complex, shifting game. Awolowo believes in clear opposition. Stand firm, challenge the federal government, build moral authority, and wait for a moment when the North stumbles and the coalition fractures. He thinks in terms of long-term strategy, of ideological consistency, of history's judgment. Samuel feels the clock more urgently. He looks at the electoral map and sees reality. The Action Group cannot govern Nigeria alone. Without alliances, they will keep shouting from the sidelines, while others make appointments, award contracts, and shape the constitutional order. He begins to argue that the West must seek accommodation, perhaps even alliance, with forces it once opposed. To many in the Action Group, this sounds like heresy. To Samuel, it sounds like survival. The meetings grow tense. Imagine a smoky room in Ibadan, the fan overhead barely stirring the hot air. Around the table sit the most powerful politicians in the Western region. On one side, Awolowo, intense, glasses glinting, voice controlled but sharp. On the other, Akintola, relaxed in posture but not in tone, words flowing with the ease of a man who has spent his life talking crowds into belief. Awolowo warns, alliances with the North's conservative party will drown the West's radical reforms in compromise. The region will lose its soul. Akintola counters, purity without power is vanity. You cannot feed our people with principles, he says, half joking, half deadly serious. You feed them with salaries, with contracts, with roads that trucks can actually drive on. Some in the room nod with Awolowo, some nod with Akintola. Some stare at the table, realizing they are witnessing the first cracks in a wall they once thought solid as rock. No one yet knows that those cracks will widen into a chasm that will swallow careers, friendships, and eventually lives. Outside, the people only see fragments. They see headlines about internal party disagreements. They hear rumors that the premier and the party leader are not always on speaking terms. They hear that certain appointments are being blocked, certain policies slowed down. They see supporters of both men begin to cluster in different corners at rallies, whispering among themselves. Yet schools still open. Children still march in newly sewn uniforms. Cocoa still leaves the ports. Money still circulates. Politicians still cut ribbons at ceremonies. Life goes on. But beneath the surface, the Western region's politics is becoming a game of chess, played with ticking bombs for pieces. Samuel feels the pressure from all sides. From above, the federal government, watching closely, ready to exploit any division. From beside, Awolowo and the old guard of the Action Group, suspicious of his moves toward compromise. From below, local supporters who want jobs, projects, favors, and do not care about ideological purity. And from within, the invisible clock of his own mortality, which he does not hear as a date, but as a growing impatience. He has not chased this long, spoken this loudly, and sacrificed this much to be remembered as a footnote. He wants to shape the story, even if it means rewriting alliances. So he begins quietly at first, to reach beyond the old lines. He travels north more often. He meets men he once criticized in fiery speeches, now in private, respectful conversations. In the cool evenings of Kaduna or in the corridors of federal power, he talks not of abstract ideals, but of practical arrangements, how the West and the North can cooperate, how to share ministries, how to keep the East from dominating certain sectors. These meetings are not photographed. They do not appear on front pages, but they change everything. For Awolowo loyalists, this is proof of betrayal. The premier's making deals with nationalist enemies. For Samuel's supporters, it is proof of maturity. The premier is thinking like a national statesman, not a regional crusader. The rivalry between two brilliant Yoruba politicians has now become a fault line that runs through the heart of Nigeria's fragile democracy. Every gesture is interpreted politically. Every delay in a policy is blamed on sabotage from the other camp. Every success is claimed as proof of one man's wisdom and the other's foolishness. By the early 1960s, the Western region is like a beautiful house with a hidden crack in the foundation. The lights are on, the guests are laughing, music plays. But if you listen closely, beneath the laughter, you can hear the creak of stressed beams. The man in charge of the house, Samuel Ladoke Akintola, walks from room to room, smiling for the guests, giving toasts, making promises, yet he knows that below the polished floorboards, forces are pushing against each other. He has limited time. Elections are coming again. The federal landscape is shifting. The patience of rivals is thinning. The British, whose presence once absorbed some of the political heat, have gone home to their reign and their memories. The players now face each other without a referee, without a common enemy to unite against. And in that exposed arena, the most dangerous conflict is not between regions. It is between former allies, between the architect and the orator, between the man who built the party and the man who now sits at its most powerful desk. The countdown that began the night Samuel first stepped into politics has reached a new phase. He has achieved what once seemed impossible. He is premier of the most advanced region in his country, a central figure in its stormy politics. But every step upward has brought him closer to the edge. Soon, the rivalry that helped sharpen his rise will begin to tear at everything around him. Soon, the house in the west will shake, and somewhere beyond the horizon in barracks filled with young men cleaning rifles and listening to rumors of corruption and chaos. The future executioners of this political drama are already watching, waiting, counting their own days. The first chair flies before anyone hears the word traitor. 1 second, the Western House of Assembly is an overcrowded hall full of shouting men in starched agbadas and dark suits. The next, it is a battlefield made of wood and glass. A microphone stand snaps. The ceremonial mace, the symbol of authority, is grabbed, wrestled for, almost used as a weapon. Papers whirl through the air like panicked birds. In the middle of the chaos, Samuel Ladoke Akintola stands very still. He watches as men he has campaigned with, laughed with, shared secrets and cigarettes with, now lunge at each other across the aisle. The speaker's desperate bell rings and rings, but nobody listens. A member climbs onto a bench, points at Samuel, and screams a word that cuts deeper than any legal motion. Betrayer! The cameras are rolling. Outside, in the streets of Ibadan, radios crackle with live commentary. In cocoa farms and crowded markets, people stop what they are doing and turn up the volume, listening as democracy in the proud Western region dissolves into a fistfight. This is no longer a quiet crack in the foundation. The house is starting to split. It does not happen overnight. Before the chairs fly, there are meetings. Before the punches, there are memos. Before the mace is nearly turned into a club, there is a slow, relentless escalation. Inside the action group, the disagreement between Awolowo and Akintola hardens into open factional war. Letters of complaint circulate. Committees investigate. Allies of one man accuse allies of the other of misusing funds, of sabotaging policies, of acting contrary to party discipline. Samuel reads these accusations with a mixture of anger and disbelief. He has spent years tearing his throat on podiums for this party, defending its policies, selling its vision village by village. Now, because he dares to suggest an alliance with the federal government dominated by the Northern People's Congress, he is painted as a sellout. His camp hits back. They say the old guard, clustered around Awolowo, is out of touch with the new realities of the Federation. They argue that ideological purity is a luxury the West can no longer afford. The federal government controls the flow of key funds, the allocation of important positions, the direction of national projects. To stand forever in opposition is to sentence one's region to the margins. The argument moves from memos to microphones. Speeches become sharper. References to misguided leadership and rigid dogmatism are not subtle. Newspapers pick sides. Editorial cartoons show two roosters, both wearing the action group's colors, tearing at each other while a huge northern eagle watches. From a high branch, amused, the countdown accelerates. A party congress is called to settle the dispute, to decide which direction the action group will take, and, by extension, which man will define its face. Men who once sang the same anthem now count delegates like military commanders counting soldiers. The Congress does not heal, it wounds. In packed halls, under heat that makes shirts stick to backs, Delegates stand up to denounce or praise. Samuel, the sitting premier, is accused of insubordination, of inappropriate alliances, of undermining the authority of the party leader. He defends himself calmly at first. He speaks of the numbers, of the federal arithmetic that sentences the West to permanent opposition if it refuses to build bridges. He invokes the welfare of farmers, traders, civil servants, all of whom depend on a government that can actually deliver. But political trials are not decided by logic alone. When the votes are counted, the verdict is devastating. Awolowo's faction has the upper hand. Samuel is stripped of his position as deputy leader of the party. The signal is clear: you may sit in the premier's chair, but not on the party's throne. For a man who has always believed that he and the party were inseparable, it feels like being cut in half. Still, he tells himself, the Constitution is on his side. He remains premier. He still has the confidence of many members of the regional house. He believes he can ride out the storm. He does not yet realize that for his rivals, this is only the opening move. The battlefield shifts from the party Congress to the House of Assembly. If Samuel's enemies cannot fully control the premier from the party headquarters, they will try to unseat him where it matters most, in Parliament. On the morning of that fateful sitting, the corridors of the Western House buzz like a disturbed beehive. Numbers are whispered. Who will cross the floor? Who has been promised what? Who is ready to sign a resolution of no confidence in the premier? Samuel arrives with his loyalists. He is not naive. He knows a coup is being prepared, not with tanks, but with votes. Yet he also knows the rules. He believes that if the Constitution is followed, if procedures are obeyed, he can fight on. The sitting begins. Resolutions are read. Accusations are thrown across the floor with the speed and heat of bullets. The speaker struggles to maintain order. Opposition members demand that a motion of no confidence be tabled. The premier's side objects, challenges the legality, cries, "Improper procedure!" Voices rise, insults fly. Someone throws the first object. Some say it is a rolled-up bundle of papers. Some say it is a book. And suddenly the thin layer of parliamentary decorum shatters. This is the moment when the chair flies, when the mace is grabbed, when the world hears that the most advanced region in Nigeria has turned its legislature into a street brawl. For the federal government, watching from Lagos, it is the perfect justification. Order must be restored. And if regional leaders cannot govern themselves, the center will intervene. The declaration of a state of emergency in the Western region is announced like a thunderclap. For 6 months, the constitution of the region is effectively suspended. A federal administrator, Dr. Moses Majikodunmi, is appointed to rule in place of the elected premier and his cabinet. The man who spent his life dragging his people towards self-rule watches as that rule is taken away from his own hands. Samuel is removed from office. For the first time since he stepped into the premier's chair, he is officially out. The newspapers are merciless. Some celebrate, calling it the removal of a divisive figure, the chastisement of a wayward son. Others warn that a dangerous precedent has been set. Today, the West. Tomorrow, any region whose politics the center dislikes. For Samuel, the public noise fades into a private silence. He sits in his home in Ibadan, the house he once left before dawn, to attend to files and meetings, and listens to the ticking of clocks. The same walls that have seen ministers come and go now hear his footsteps, restless and angry. In that enforced stillness, he has time to think. He thinks about the boy in Ogbomoso, the village teacher dreaming beyond the chalkboard. He thinks about the lawyer in London, debating colonial officials in cold committee rooms. He thinks about every speech he has given, every hand he has shaken, every night he has gone to bed believing that he was marching toward a great national goal. Is this how it ends? In suspension? In a footnote explaining why the West had to be rescued from his leadership? No, he refuses that ending. If they imagine he will go quietly into retirement, write gentle memoirs, and wait for history to judge, they do not understand the man they are dealing with. The countdown for him has just become personal. When the emergency ends, the West does not return to the status quo. It returns to a new arrangement. One Samuel has spent his months in the wilderness, carefully constructing. Out of the ruins of the Action Group split, he helps form a new party, the Nigerian National Democratic Party, the NNDP. To his enemies, this is proof of unforgivable treachery. To his supporters, it is evidence of his ability to adapt, to build a new platform when the old one collapses under the weight of its own contradictions. The NNDP does not emerge alone. It is part of a wider alliance, the Nigerian National Alliance, bound tightly to the Northern People's Congress that controls the federal government. This is the partnership Samuel had argued for from the beginning, a partnership that the old Action Group leadership denounced as betrayal. Now, under the new rules, it becomes his ladder back to power. When regional elections and political maneuvers are carried out under this new configuration, Samuel climbs that ladder with fierce determination. Deals are struck, local chiefs are courted, old enemies in the north suddenly become indispensable allies. And in a twist that would have seemed impossible just months earlier, the man who was removed under a state of emergency walks back into the premier's office. This time, he does not walk as the delegate of a rebellious opposition. He walks as the regional face of the federal ruling coalition. The teacher's son returns to his desk, but the desk now stands at the intersection of two currents: the demands of his region and the expectations of his national allies. Balance them correctly and he can remake his legacy. Misjudge them and he will be crushed between them. Back in power, Samuel works with a feverish intensity that surprises even his closest aides. He knows how quickly a pen can be taken from his hand. Every file on his desk is not just bureaucratic paper. It is an opportunity to prove something, to his enemies, to his supporters, and perhaps most of all, to himself. He pushes for renewed investment in regional infrastructure, roads that connect farms to markets, bridges over rivers that once cut, villages off in the rainy season, government buildings in towns that had long felt neglected. He leans on his federal connections to secure projects and funds, arguing that a stable, prosperous West is in everyone's interest. He works to keep the education program alive, the free primary school system that had become the pride of the region and the moment of glory for Awolowo's earlier administration. Had strained finances and faced political turbulence, Samuel refuses to be the premier who allowed classrooms to empty. He fights to maintain funding, reshaping budgets, angering some who would rather see the money go into patronage and prestige projects. In cabinet meetings, he bangs the table when he feels civil servants are dragging their feet. History will not ask who signed your voucher, he tells them. It will ask whether there is a school in that village, whether that road exists, whether that hospital treated anyone. No, these are not just slogans. They are his defense against the accusation that he has sold the soul of the region for federal favor. If he can show concrete achievements, if he can point to buildings, programs, and salaries, then perhaps the charge of betrayal will not stick as strongly. Yet he knows his enemies are not impressed by asphalt or textbooks. They are building their own narrative, and they are working on their own clock. Outside his government, a counter-alliance forms. The fragments of the old Action Group, now bitterly opposed to Samuel, join hands with other opposition forces to create the united Progressive Grand Alliance UPGA. They forge a story in which the NNDP is painted as a puppet, the West as a region under occupation by a coalition of conservative forces. In this story, Samuel is cast not as a pragmatic statesman, but as the villain, the man who opened the gate, the collaborator. At rallies, his name is greeted with boos, sometimes with stones. Posters show his face half in shadow, sometimes alongside caricatures of northern politicians, as if to suggest that he has ceased to be truly of the West. The rivalry with Awolowo has moved beyond personal disagreement. Awolowo himself is now on trial for alleged treasonable activities, facing the possibility of a long prison sentence. His loyalists see this as political persecution, engineered by the federal government and abetted by Samuel's alliance. They do not forgive, they organize, they whisper in beer parlors and student hostels and market stalls. The premier has sold us. We must reclaim our region. The stage is set for another confrontation. This time, the battleground will not be party congress or assembly floor. It will be the streets. The next elections in the Western region are announced like a starting pistol. For Samuel, they are more than a normal democratic exercise. They are a referendum on his entire political life. If the NNDP wins, he can claim vindication. The people have chosen stability, development, and his style of politics. If he loses, history will stamp him with the word his enemies have wielded so freely: betrayer. He feels the time pressure in his bones. He is no longer the young man racing from rally to rally without sleep. His hair is grayer, his face fuller, his voice occasionally cracks when he pushes it too hard. Doctors warn him again about exhaustion. Again, he smiles and waves them away, because this election is not just about victory, it is about survival. He believes that if he is pushed out now, with his enemies in control of the streets and the narrative, he will not just lose office, he will be exposed. So he throws everything into the campaign. His convoys crisscross the region. He visits royal palaces, kneels before traditional rulers, makes promises, recalls old friendships. He addresses civil servants and cocoa farmers, reminds them of salaries paid, roads built, scholarships awarded. On posters, he's shown as a steady hand in stormy times. His opponents paint him very differently. They speak of corruption, intimidation, federal interference. They claim that the NNDP is using every instrument of the state to tilt the playing field. Police, local chiefs, even electoral officers. As election day approaches, the atmosphere in the West becomes electric, then poisonous. Rumors of planned rigging spread like harmattan fire. People whisper, "If they steal this one, we will not accept it." Samuel hears these whispers. He chooses to believe that, in the end, numbers will reflect his support, or at least that whatever adjustments occur will not exceed what Nigerian politics has come to accept as normal. He misjudges. The official results come in: the NNDP has won, by margins so wide in some constituencies that even longtime supporters blink in disbelief. Opposition candidates who were cheered loudly at rallies are recorded as having received almost no votes. Areas known to be hostile to the premier suddenly announce overwhelming support for him. The federal and regional governments declare it a decisive endorsement of Samuel's leadership. Opposition leaders call it daylight robbery. What begins as protest quickly mutates into something darker. Streets fill with angry youths, some carrying placards, others carrying petrol. Houses belonging to perceived NNDP supporters are marked, then attacked. There is a new phrase on everyone's lips: Operation Weighty. Douse it with petrol, set it on fire. Flames rise over once quiet neighborhoods. Smoke stains the sky of the proud western region. Men are chased from their homes. Politicians are hunted, beaten, humiliated. Some are burned alive. This is no longer politics. This is vengeance. Samuel, now confirmed again as premier by results that have turned his region into a war zone, sits in council meetings, listening to security briefings that sound like reports from a civil war. Villages where he once campaigned are now described as no-go areas. The irony is knife-sharp. He had sought alliances and compromises to protect his people from permanent opposition, believing that inclusion in the federal network would bring stability and growth. Instead, at the height of his power, the West is more unstable than ever. The house he wanted to strengthen is on fire. And from the barracks, from the background where they have watched politicians brawl and burn their own house, the young men with rifles begin to ask a question of their own. If the politicians cannot stop this, who will? In those final months, Samuel moves like a man trying to hold together a storm with bare hands. He appeals for calm on radio broadcasts, his voice measured, carrying a weariness that no speechwriter can erase. He meets with police chiefs, with federal ministers, with traditional rulers. He pushes for more forces, more patrols, more arrests of arsonists and rioters. He also tightens his circle. Trust has become a rare commodity. He knows there are people within his own party who are frightened, angry, or quietly preparing to distance themselves from him if things go very wrong. He keeps his own counsel more than before. Sometimes, late at night in Government House, he walks onto a balcony and looks out over Ibadan, the city where his rise and fall have become public spectacle. The lights stretch unevenly into the distance, bright in some quarters, sparse in others. Somewhere out there, houses are still smoldering. He thinks perhaps of the early days, when power felt like a clean promise. He thinks of the moment he first sat at this desk, hand resting on the wood, feeling the pulse of history beneath his fingers. Now he feels something else beneath the surface. Not the thrill of ascent, the tremor of something large, unseen, shifting. The rumors are impossible to ignore. Talk of plots, whispers of soldiers meeting secretly, hints that the patience of those in uniforms is running out. He has lived his entire life racing against clocks. Colonial timetables, constitutional deadlines, electoral calendars, Congress dates. Now there is a new countdown, one he cannot see but can feel in the way people lower their voices when he enters a room. Somewhere, men are deciding how many more nights this experiment in self-rule will be allowed to run. Somewhere, hands are setting watches to an hour that will not appear in official communiques. And Samuel Ladoke Akintola, the boy who once read English primers in a dusty classroom in Ogbomoso, the man who argued with colonial officials and wrestled in parliament with former comrades, moves through his days as premier unaware of the exact number, but sensing, nay, with the instinct of a man who has lived by political timing, that whatever comes next will not be a negotiation or an election or a party congress. It will be something that does not listen to speeches, something that does not wait for the bell in the house to ring, something that approaches quietly in the dark on boots that do not echo until it is too late. The boots arrive just after midnight. All day, the rumors have been circling like vultures, whispers of soldiers moving without orders, of armories quietly opened, of things being prepared that do not fit into any column of the Constitution. But rumors are a constant in Nigerian politics. They are the background noise of power. This time, the noise is real. Out beyond the walls of Government House in Ibadan, engines growl in the darkness. A truck's headlights dip and rise on the uneven road. Inside, young men in khaki sit in tense silence, fingers resting on cold metal. They have rehearsed this moment in their minds. Some have rehearsed it in secret meetings for months. On the front seat, a junior officer glances at his wristwatch. A few minutes past 1 in the morning. If everything goes according to plan, the government of the Western region, and within hours, The entire First Republic will be broken before the sun rises. Inside the building they are driving toward, Samuel Ladoke Akintola does not yet know that time in its usual elastic sense has ended for him. He is down to hours. The day before has been long, even by his own hard standards. Security briefings, meetings with commissioners, phone calls with federal ministers in Lagos. Everyone agrees the situation in the western region is bad. Grave, some say, choosing the careful word civil servants use when they mean dangerous. Operation Wedi continues to stain the map with fire. Reports of arson, ambushes, and retaliatory killings arrive so regularly that they no longer sound like separate incidents. They blur into a single roar. Samuel listens, gives orders, signs papers. On his desk lie two piles of documents. One contains routine governance, budget reallocations, school construction updates, health center staffing lists. The other contains requests for more police, more armored vehicles, more emergency powers. Two faces of the same job. He has always liked to believe that the first pile is why he entered politics, why he argued in London, why he wrestled in the assembly. The second pile is the one history keeps pushing toward him. In a rare pause between meetings, he leans back and looks at the framed photograph of himself in ceremonial robes as Are Ona Kakanfo of Yorubaland, the modern holder of an ancient title, the war general of a people who once measured time in battles won and lost. It was meant to be an honor. Tonight it feels like a prophecy, a war chief presiding over a region at war with itself. The rivalry with Awolowo has left the arena of speeches and votes. Now it lives inside people's sentences. In beer parlors, one hears it in the way men say, "If Awo were here, this would not happen." Or, "It is Akintola who opened the door to this chaos." In others one hears, "It is Awo who pushed us into this," refusing compromise. It is Akintola who is trying to keep the house standing. Two men, two stories. One in prison, serving a long sentence after a treason trial. Many call politically motivated. One in power, his name on official letterheads, his signature still capable of changing lives. But beneath that difference lies a shared reality neither of them fully controls. The First Republic is listing, like a ship that has taken on too much water. Census disputes, contested elections, ethnic mistrust, political assassinations, each has opened another hole in the hull. Tonight, as Samuel takes off his glasses and massages the bridge of his nose, he's not thinking about epic historical metaphors. He is thinking about very practical, immediate things. The Commissioner of Police has given him a briefing that leaves a sour taste in his mouth. Troops have been restless. Some officers have been unusually difficult to reach. There are reports, fuzzy, unconfirmed, of soldiers visiting politicians' homes late at night. "Do you have names?" Samuel asks. The policeman shrugs, looks down at his notes. "Nothing solid," he says. "Rumors. Always rumors." The clock on the wall insists it is still just another late evening in Government House. Time disagrees. He could leave. This is the twist history rarely dwells on. At several moments in those last days and hours, staying is a choice. Friends and allies, whispering over telephones that crackle with bad connections, urge caution. Some suggest he should spend a few nights in Lagos, closer to the Federal Power Center, surrounded by a different set of guards. Others say he should travel to Ogbomoso, retreat temporarily to his hometown, where the emotional shield of kinship and tradition might at least buy him warning. A more calculating man might read the signs and schedule a sudden working visit abroad. Samuel listens, nods, thanks them. He does not leave. Part of it is pride. Fleeing feels like an admission that he believes the rumors are more powerful than his office, more real than his title. Part of it is calculation. If he runs, enemies will call him coward. Awolowo's supporters will laugh that the man who promised stability could not even protect his own skin. Part of it is something more stubborn and private. He has spent his life walking toward the center of the storm. The idea of stepping away when his region is on fire feels like an act of betrayal far more serious than any alliance with the North. He straightens his shoulders. If danger is coming, it will find him at his post. It is a warrior's logic. It is also a fatal one. After midnight, Government House grows quiet. Files are stacked. Typewriters are covered. The corridors that echoed all day with footsteps and arguments now lie dim and still. Outside, the air is warm and thick, carrying faint sounds from distant neighborhoods, where life continues as if history is not about to pivot. In his room, Samuel sits in a chair by the window. A lamp pools yellow light over an open folder. He is reviewing a set of proposals concerning teacher training colleges. Proof, even now, that part of his mind refuses to surrender to the idea that there might not be a later to implement them. On the desk, next to the official papers, lies a smaller, more personal stack. Letters from constituents, invitations to events, appeals for scholarships. He reads one or two slowly, hearing in them the voice of the Nigeria he once believed he was building. a country where a boy from a poor family could write to a premier about his dreams. The clock inches toward 1. He is aware of his own fatigue. The years of shouting into microphones, of nightly strategy meetings, of endless travel, have thickened his body and lined his face. But his mind is still quick, still sharp, still calculating. He does not know that calculations are about to become irrelevant. Somewhere beyond the compound walls, a truck changes gear. The first sign is not the sound of boots. It is the bark of a guard's voice cut off halfway through a sentence. Somewhere near the outer gate, there is a shout, the metallic snap of a weapon being cocked, a brief, ugly burst of gunfire. Then silence heavy enough to make the air itself feel thicker. Samuel freezes. The human brain is capable of extraordinary speed when panic meets training. In the seconds that follow, he flips through possibilities. It could be a robbery attempt, a local disturbance, some misfiring nerves among the guards. Then he hears a command in clipped military tones, the scrape of more boots, the crash of a door forced open. This is no local disturbance. This is organized. He stands up, heart pounding now, and reaches for the small pistol he keeps nearby. It is a gesture at control, at resistance, at the idea that he will not simply be a passive target. He steps into the corridor. His staff are emerging from their rooms, eyes wide, some barefoot, tying wrappers, clutching files as if paperwork might still matter. What is happening? Like someone whispers. Back inside, another hisses. Stay low. But the sound of the boots is already inside the house. The young officers who burst into Government House that night are not interested in procedure or negotiation. They are part of a wider plot unfolding across the country, one that has already sent soldiers to the home of the Prime Minister in Lagos, to the residence of Amadou Bello in Kaduna, to barracks and armories and radio stations. The map of the coup is national, but its impact in each place is brutally local. Here in Ibadan, their mission is simple: eliminate the premier. They move fast through the corridors, weapons raised, nerves stretched tight. The walls that have heard decades of speeches, the floors polished by the footsteps of visiting dignitaries, now ring with shouted orders. Where is he? Which room? A steward points, hands shaking. In these seconds, the distance between Samuel's door and the approaching boots is a measurable, shrinking thing. 10 meters, 8, 5. The time available to change the story of his life is down to heartbeats. He steps into view. For a moment, the scene freezes. The premier, in a simple robe, face pale but posture straight. The soldiers, young enough for some of them to have listened to his speeches as schoolboys, now looking at him over the barrels of their guns. In another version of this night, a version that belongs to fantasy, not to this hard reality, there might be words, a speech that turns hearts, a sudden refusal of orders. In this version, there is only a brief exchange. Shouts, a movement of his arm, the crack of gunfire. The bullets tear through the early morning calm. They leave holes in plaster, splinters in wood, a pattern of destruction that will be photographed in the days to come, printed in newspapers whispered about for years. They also leave a body on the floor. The man who once dominated rallies with his voice, who navigated the labyrinth of constitutional conferences, who fought his former comrades in the House and wrestled with the Federal Center, lies still. Blood spreads across the polished surface. Footsteps move around him, not with the care of attendants, but with the brisk efficiency of men checking that a task is complete. Move, one says. They do not stay to compose the scene. They have other targets, other addresses, other doors to kick in before dawn. Within minutes, they are gone. The sound of the truck's engine fading back into the night from which it came. Government House, the beating heart of Western region politics, is suddenly a mausoleum. The clock on the wall shows a time that no history book will record as an official hour of transition. For Samuel Ladoke Akintola, time has ended. For Nigeria, it has cracked open. The news spreads unevenly in jagged lines. In some parts of the West, people wake to rumors before they hear any official announcement. They speak in half-formed sentences. They say soldiers. They say the premier. No, it is a lie. It cannot be. Radios at first offer confusion. Regular programming is interrupted, resumes, cuts off again. Somewhere in Lagos, soldiers are arguing over which words should make their way into the nation's ears. The language of coup, irreversible actions, correction, necessary intervention, is being invented in real time. In Ibadan, around Government House, the reality is not abstract. There are bullet holes. There is blood. There is the heavy, stunned silence of staff who have seen something too big to process. By mid-morning, the outlines of what has happened become clearer. The Prime Minister is missing, presumed dead. Amadou Bello, the powerful Sardauna of Sokoto, has been killed in his home. In the West, the Premier's dead. The First Republic, barely 6 years old, has been decapitated. Awolowo, sitting in prison, hears the news from beyond bars. It is one of history's cruel ironies. The man his supporters saw as the rightful leader of the West is alive because he was removed from the game. The man they saw as the usurper is dead because he was still on the board. The rivalry that defined a generation of Yoruba politics will never again take place in the same room. From now on, it will be fought in memory. In Ogbomoso, the town where a boy once walked barefoot to school, a different kind of quiet settles. Word arrives that their son, teacher, lawyer, orator, premier, Areona Kakanfo, is gone, not by natural causes, not in old age, but by gunfire in the dark. For some, grief is immediate and raw. They remember the young man who left for the city with nothing but his wits and his books, who stood in front of classrooms making English words dance on a blackboard, who wrote fiery articles for newspapers. They remember a neighbor's son, a cousin, an uncle, for others the newslands with complicated weight. By 1966, opinions on Akintola in the West are not simple. Many blame him for the alliance with the North, for the fractures in the Action Group, for the electoral crisis that lit the match of Operation Wedi. Some had cursed his name as they watched their neighborhoods burn. Now he is dead. Suddenly, the insult traitor tastes different in the mouth. It is one thing to oppose a man in power. It is another to speak of a man whose body has been carried away and placed in the ground. At his burial, traditional rites mingle with the heavy presence of soldiers and officials. Prayers rise into the sky over Ogbomoso, joining the smoke of distant fires and the radio waves of military proclamations. The teacher's son, who raced time all his life, has reached the one deadline no one negotiates. The military government that takes over tries to move quickly. Uniformed men sit where civilian ministers once sat. Decrees are issued. The regional structures that define Samuel's career, Action Group, NNDP, UPGA, the entire architecture of party rivalry, are swept, aside with the blunt stroke of a soldier's pen. In the official narrative of the new rulers, the coup is a necessary correction. They speak of corruption, of chaos, of politicians who pushed Nigeria to the brink. They do not speak of the blood on the floors of homes in Ibadan and Kaduna and elsewhere, except in the vaguest possible terms. For a while it seems as if history agrees with them. Many ordinary Nigerians, exhausted by years of crisis, welcome the idea of discipline, of no nonsense, of a firm hand to restore order. The faces of civilian politicians, Akintola's included, fade from front pages, replaced by uniforms and crests. But history has its own way of keeping receipts. When the missiles finally fall silent decades later, when new republics rise and fall, when young scholars begin to unbox old documents and listen to old tapes, the question returns: what exactly happened to the dream of self-rule in those first years? And in that question, Samuel's shadow reappears. His legacy is a battlefield. In the classrooms of southwestern Nigeria, his name is often introduced in the same breath as Awolowo's. Two men, two paths, two answers to the same question. How does a region protect its interests in a fragile federation? One pursued confrontation with the federal center, insisting on principles even when they made compromise difficult. The other pursued alliance, insisting that without a seat at the central table, the West would always eat last. The tragedy is not only that their rivalry tore their party apart, it is that the larger system around them rewarded extremity and punished nuance. In the feverish narratives that emerged after his death, Samuel was often frozen in a single role: the man who broke ranks, who sold out, whose name became shorthand for betrayal in some circles. Yet when one looks closer, the picture is not so simple. There is the Akintola who fought to keep schools open, who argued that governance was more than slogans, who pushed civil servants, with the reminder that history measured results, not paperwork. There is the Akintola who accepted a war chief's title in a time of internal war, who believed he could navigate between local loyalties and national realities. And there is the Akintola whose political calculations helped create conditions that his enemies used to ignite the wild, wild West. Hero, villain, pragmatist, opportunist, it depends on where one stands and which wound one is touching. Time does something that coups, prison sentences, and angry headlines cannot. It turns people into questions rather than answers. In the years after his death, as Nigeria cycles through more military regimes, a brutal civil war, and eventual returns to civilian rule, the certainty with which some once condemned or praised Akintola begins to soften. At universities, students read about him not as a living, shouting presence, but as a case study. They trace his journey from Ogbomoso classroom to London law office to Ibadan government house. Some write theses asking whether his strategy of alliance was fatally flawed, or simply ahead of its time in a country not ready to manage pluralistic politics. His speeches, once delivered in open-air rallies to sweating crowds, are now quoted in academic papers and political memoirs. His name appears on roads, on public buildings. In Ogbomoso, a university of technology bears his name, an institution training new generations of engineers and scientists who may never fully grasp the political storms behind that naming. To them, Ladoke Akintola is a campus, an exam timetable, a logo on their exercise books. Yet even that is a kind of answer. The boy who once learned to shape letters on a slate has become part of the educational infrastructure of his people. The teacher's chalk has outlived the premier's chair. There is another twist in his posthumous story. For all the lines drawn between Awo's people and Akintola's people, between those who marched behind one banner or the other, history refuses to leave them neatly separated. Their followers intermarry. Their intellectual heirs sit in the same lecture halls, attend the same churches and mosques, argue in the same newspapers. Some later politicians try to wear a bit of both mantles, invoking Awolowo's welfare policies while practicing Akintola's pragmatic alliances. In quiet moments, older men in Yoruba towns will sometimes say, if only they had found a way to work together, if only they had been given more time. But time was exactly what they did not have. From colonial timetables to constitutional deadlines, from emergency proclamations to coup plans scribbled in secret, the clock was always ticking over their shoulders, counting down to a morning when Boots would decide what ballots had failed to settle. Samuel spent his life racing that clock. He did not outrun it, but he left footprints deep enough that even those who curse his name walk in paths he helped clear. Paths of regional autonomy, of constitutional argument, of fierce insistence that the West must not be a spectator in the Nigerian drama. If one imagines him in a final, impossible scene, standing at the edge of his own story, looking back, perhaps he would not recognize the Nigeria that exists decades after his death. Oil wealth and oil curses, military rulers who stayed far longer than any civilian premier, new republics, new parties, new acronyms that make the old ones sound quaint. Yet some things would feel heartbreakingly familiar. The debates about center and periphery, the suspicion between regions, the recurring temptation to see politics as war by other means. And in the West, the continuing argument about who truly defended its interests, who compromised too much, who refused to compromise enough. In that ongoing argument, his name is a touchstone, spoken with admiration in some rooms, with anger in others, with curiosity by those who are just discovering that history is not a clear-cut tale of saints and villains, but a crowded marketplace of choices made under pressure. Samuel Ladoke Akintola lived fast inside that pressure. A teacher racing the school bell to finish a lesson, a lawyer racing deadlines in distant London, a politician racing election calendars, party congresses, emergency proclamations. In the end, the race ended not with a vote, but with bullets in the night. But the questions he wrestled with, the ones that turned him from ally to rival, from premier to target, did not die on the floor of Government House. They are still here. Every time Nigeria asks itself how to balance region and nation, principle and pragmatism, loyalty and flexibility, the ghost of that, tall, sharp-tongued man from Ogbomoso, stands in the doorway, listening, not with a pistol in his hand, with a question on his lips. What price are you willing to pay for the future you believe in? And how much time do you really have before someone else decides for you?